Welcome to the Twice Over Movies podcast. If you're new here, check out our website at thetwiceover.com to get a better understanding of how we do our movie reviews. Our goal is to provide insight on elements of a movie which you consider more or less important, so that our scores are never misleading. Remember to follow us at the Twice Over on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and support us on Patreon.
My name is Pai Patel. I have been in a shipwreck. I am on a lifeboat alone with a tiger. Please send help.
Hey everyone, this is the Twice Over Movies podcast. I'm your host Faraz.
And I'm Yousuf. What it do, baby? Faraz, what's going on?
Life of Pi is going on today, man. We're going to talk about Life of Pi. It's a Ang Lee directed film based off a best-selling novel. First question, Yousuf, have you read the book?
I have read the book, and that added a little bit more depth here because I don't think the book and the movie are necessarily telling the exact same story. So that was kind of cool to kind of contemplate as I was watching. The other thing that, I mean, obviously you don't get in the book is you don't get any of the visual elements. So like the movie as a standalone, even without what it took from the book, it has its own punch that it packs. So I don't think that I lost anything by knowing the story ahead of time for sure. Only enhanced it, I would say. So really enjoyed the movie overall. But what are your thoughts? Have you read the book?
I have read the book. I read the book back in early high school, I think.
Oh, wow.
And I like the movie more, but I'm also more of a movie guy than I am a reader. But I thought the story followed pretty much the same as the book. I think the only differences were like who he's talking to at certain points, right? Because in the movie, he's talking to a writer. Whereas in the book, he's only talking to the insurance people.
Yeah, I think, and that was probably, I mean, I don't think that's a huge change really in terms of how the story plays out. I think more so there's kind of like a change in tone perhaps in certain parts in terms of how things are represented or I don't know, just exactly the way you're led to believe things played out in certain parts of the movie. There are suggestions one way or the other in the book versus the movie, I felt like. So it's kind of interesting. It's very subtle changes, but, you can kind of toy around with what that means and what the director was trying to convey versus what the writer was trying to convey.
Yeah, I get what you're saying here.
Yeah.
But we can't really get into it without giving too much away, so we'll stop it there. All right, we'll start with our scores. And I will start with my acting score. I gave this movie for acting an 80. I thought it was a well-acted movie throughout. The casting was pretty good too. It was very believable. I mean, we have to consider that there's different stages of life that we're following Pi, the main character, and at each stage, it related well to the previous, and the actors seemed to hold the same characteristics throughout. So I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I gave it a 75. I definitely thought it was above average. They pulled Bollywood actors to play the adult roles in this film, right? So you get Tabu and you get Irrfan Khan, who are not, neither of them are a joke. They're serious actors, and so I thought they did a really good job. I mean, I thought it was above average. I didn't go too high simply because I thought their characters, based on the constraints of the movie and the way that the story unfolds, they weren't exactly given the most room to shine, but the roles they played I thought were very important. And then to your point, to the child actors and the main actor, I thought they fit their roles really well. There is a little bit of a difference in a movie like this where a large chunk of the movie you don't necessarily have the most interaction between one or more actors. So it's more one actor on the screen kind of, doing his thing on his own. And, but that adds its own element, you get kind of an introspective look at a character that way too. So yeah, I went with the 75, above average, only because of the plot and the way the story unfolds itself. I couldn't go higher.
All right, speaking of plot, I gave the direction and the plot a combination score of 90. This is one of the stronger suits of the film. If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure Ang Lee won Best Director at the Academy Awards for this movie. The story is engaging throughout. The pacing is good. The storytelling is well done. Again, this might benefit a little bit that it is based on a book in which the story is also obviously a strong suit of the book. And I thought it was a pretty good adaptation of the movie. I mean, sorry, of
All right, we got a big difference here. So there's a lot to talk about here.
really.
I went with a 65 for a story and plot.
Wow.
Yeah, so maybe we're looking at this different ways, perhaps. But I think one thing that I didn't necessarily like is the story ends up fairly repetitive for stretches. You get a lot of contemplating, followed by some sort of encounter, particularly on the boat, and then you get some beautiful scenery, and it kind of goes in a cycle for a large chunk of the movie. I didn't love that part of it. What I did like was the first third of the movie is very exciting, and you get kind of a very immersive feel for growing up in India, and what this kid's life might have been like. So I don't know. Maybe I'm being a little too harsh, particularly because, like you said, this is coming from a novel. So I'm not as ready to give credit to the director on those parts. I don't think the director's only contribution is necessarily to the story and plot either. So we can talk a little bit about that. But I guess I was a little more harsh just in that light. But there's definitely good things in this movie. One thing that I really liked in this movie, though, in the plot, was the presentation of an unreliable narrator. So you kind of have this sense that this guy's going through an ordeal, and everything that he is portraying and the way he's portraying it may not be exactly the way things unfolded in real time. So there's a lot of, I don't know, mind bendiness to that if you start kind of questioning every little thing in the way that the narrator tells you it happened. So I definitely liked that about it. Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't go higher than that. But I'm sure we can get into the nitty gritty of why we're so different on there.
Well, it's not so much that I disagree with what you said. I do agree with it. It's just considering like the what we're starting off with here, which is a movie about like a shipwreck and then a boy lost at sea. It's there's not much to work with, but I thought Ang Lee did a pretty good job of making it entertaining and presenting the story in a cohesive, coherent way that we could enjoy.
Yeah, we're looking at this in a little bit of a different lens then, I suppose, right? We're taking different things into consideration there, which is okay. So yeah, we can get into that more, but that'll be an interesting discussion. So moving on then, let's what did you have for cinematography and photography? That's I think a strong suit of this movie. So let's go there.
Yeah, for sure. This is the best part of the movie. I give it 100. Now, I watched this movie initially when it first came out. I saw it in 3D, and I remember like thinking, wow, this was a great experience. It's one of those movies that's made for the movie theater, and it's one of those movies that took full advantage of like the 3D experience, and it was not just like a gimmick. Yeah, I gave it 100. I thought it was incredible. There's so many times in the movie that you just want to pause and just appreciate that still image, and it's a joy to watch, really.
Yeah, I had a 95. I did pause several times just to appreciate what was on screen. And you're right. Like even watching this at home, you automatically lose some of the beauty that was presented in the movie in its original form. So that's one thing. If you miss this in theaters, you missed out, and there's almost no way to come back from it. But yeah, like there's so many moments where you pretty much just have to pause and appreciate what's going on screen. I mean, there's a lot of natural beauty that's being represented, but there's also, I mean, there's a representation of kind of the vastness of like the isolation that the character finds himself in, which is really well portrayed without anyone saying it, without anyone doing anything to explicitly mention that. You're getting it just from the scenery, and I thought that was really beautifully done. So yeah, the shots of the boat as kind of a tiny speck in the middle of the ocean, the aloneness that conveys. I thought those were some of the best points of the movie in terms of cinematography.
No doubt. All right, for writing, I gave this an 85. I thought it's a good, well-written movie. Considering again, same thing that I kind of came in with the same mindset that I did for the direction of the movie. Considering the basis of the movie and how simple it is, how little there is to work with when you're writing a movie with such few characters, and where 80+% of the movie is just one guy on a boat with animals. And it still has a lot of thought-provoking writing in it, and it's still, and then like you said in the beginning, the setup of Pi growing up in India, that setup was very well done. I thought the writing in that part of the movie, the first third, was great. And then even when he is lost out at sea and he has his journal and he's writing down his thoughts and he's like having discussions by himself with himself, or I guess with God, I thought it was all very well done. So 85 is my score. What about you?
I went with an 80 for a lot of the same reasons. Yeah, there is very little dialogue in this movie after like the first third of the movie, let's say, right? And the result is that all the dialogue you get generally has a particular purpose. A lot of it, yeah, is Pi reflecting on himself. You know, you get a really good look into the character in that light. And the first third of the movie, again, where you're kind of seeing, you know, how he was raised and, you know, what led him to the, you know, to the events unfolding the way they did. You know, the writing is just as purposeful in that third of the movie as well. I think it's actually pretty interesting to go back and do a rewatch of this movie and reanalyze a lot of the dialogue. And I think there's kind of another layer there that you can't understand until you've seen the journey to its completion first. I think going back is kind of an interesting second element being added to the dialogue.
All right. I think the inner dialogue that we talked about and the self-reflection, it leads a lot very well into the themes and motifs. And this is another part of the movie that's obviously a large part of the movie. And it's important beyond the journey that Pi has being lost out at sea. He's obviously a very spiritual person, very curious, and his curiosity leads him to believe in 3 different religions as a young boy, and I guess as a teenager when he's lost out in sea as well. And this manifests in many ways during the movie while he's on the boat, while he's lost, while he's losing hope, but then keeping hope. And the way he's treating the animals that he's with, mainly the tiger Richard Parker, and how he seems to survive out at sea. So considering all of that, the themes and motifs are a huge part of the movie, and it's really what keeps or what stays with you after the movie that you think about. So I gave it a 90.
I had it as an 80. So maybe I didn't feel as strongly as you did, but I agree generally with your points. I mean, the role of religion in Pi's life and I guess the commentary that it's making on religion as a whole is never lost throughout the movie. I think at every point you can kind of feel a connection back to that. And again, that is not easy to do when you don't have characters on screen who can kind of carry those thoughts into, you know, the dialogue into the movie. I mean, you have to do that without much dialogue. You have to do that just with, you know, a lot of times a solitary character on screen, or a character talking to himself. You know, I mean, you don't have a lot of room to maneuver with that. Yet they were able to keep that thought on the viewer's mind from start to finish. So I thought they did a really good job of that. You know, I probably could have even gone higher than an 80, to be honest. I think I settled on 80 because they're I felt that that is the one kind of theme that they are pushing forth, and there's not a lot of other things that they're trying to convey to the audience. It's very possible that I missed something, but that was the by and large the focus in terms of themes and motifs. So it's not very versatile in that respect, and I suppose that's why I didn't go higher. But you know, they actually did an excellent job of conveying that one theme in its entirety. So
All right, so at this point, we'll do a spoiler alert. Everything that we discuss now, we'll discuss the story in its entirety, including all spoilers. All right, Yusuf, what do you want to get started with in terms of the discussion? There is some stuff I want to talk about, but nothing in particular or in any particular order. Do you have anything you want to start with?
Let's start with the story and plot. We got a big divide here, and I think the way that the plot plays out kind of affects a lot of the other elements of the movie. So let's start there, and then we'll work our way out from there. Yeah, let's dive in. So you want to talk about what goes on in the first third of the movie, kind of where we don't really know where the story's going, but we're just kind of building kind of the essence of this character through different stages of his early life.
Yeah, so I mean, the movie actually starts with a Canadian writer who has gone to somewhere in Canada. I forget where it was. Was it Winnipeg?
Maybe. Honestly, I don't know. Yeah, that whole scene actually, I mean, and that whole aspect of it, I mean, it was very, very clear, even on a first watch, right? Without even reading the book, I would think. It's very clear that that's just kind of the device they're setting up so I can get into the story. So I wasn't even really
Yeah.
paying attention to what was going on with this writer and hey, I hear you have a story to tell me and all of that. It was kind of just I was like waiting for that part to get kind of through so we could get into the actual story.
For sure. Actually, this was one of my complaints of the movie is that I feel like that they could have done without it. If they just went straight to Pi as a child and showed that his growing up, his experience as a child, growing up at a zoo with his family and his interactions in his community with animals and his spirituality and his curiosity and all of that. If they just dove right into that, they didn't really need to have this set up before where you are talking to the adult Pi and he's starting the story off for you to this writer.
Yeah,
I mean,
you have
I
to.
thought it was a little gimmicky to do it that way. It was probably the worst part of the movie for me, honestly,
Yeah.
beginning to end. Every time like I mean, I like Irfan Khan a lot. Actually, he's probably like one of the better Bollywood actors who does more serious and provoking movies. But like, I just didn't like those scenes at all. But that's how the story starts, right? We start with a writer asking Pi, he says, I met a man at a coffee shop in India, and he told me that I should come talk to you if I want a story to write about. And then Pi basically dives into the story.
I don't want to harp on this too much, but I think that was part of why I was kind of harsh, because you have to understand that that is not an element of the book. So like that is an element that, you know,
Yeah.
the writers of the movie actually chose actively to bring into here. It's not something that they were just adapting in. So I felt like there was almost no added value to that. I suppose you get a little bit more, you know, explicit detailing on the mindset of Pi as an adult, reflecting back on his experiences as a kid. And, you know, maybe that's not as easy to do in a movie form as a book form, right? So they kind of brought in this element so that, you know, we can have kind of Irfan Khan as an adult saying, when I think back to this and that, this is how it affected me and all that. Like, I guess there maybe you can give them that excuse, but yeah, I just felt like there's got to be a smoother way to do it, or they really could have cut down on the amount of shots that we need of this writer eating his his naan and his vegetarian meal with Irfan Khan, and it was just weird. I don't know, like I every time they went back to that, and then they had this Canadian writer doing an Indian accent to mimic Pi's uncle or
That
whoever.
was bad.
Yeah, like it was just so, I don't know. Let's move off the topic, but yeah, I just, those scenes seemed a little gratuitous. They could have done without it for sure. So, but when we get into the real story, when we flash back to Pi as a child, there's kind of a really intriguing story that they're telling here, right? I mean, it's India, but it's like French influenced India because they're in Pondicherry, which used to be a French colony, I believe, right?
Yeah, it was controlled by the French
Yeah.
during British India's rule there. So it was not British India, it was French India.
Yeah, and that's kind of an aspect that you don't see on screen or, in media generally as much, I suppose. I wasn't really aware of it. And so it's kind of cool to see kind of the way they portrayed the French influence in India. They show a lot of, even before we get into like the real bulk of the cinematography stuff, there is a lot of beautiful shots of India, even the street as well as kind of the countryside. You get all of it in this pretty condensed flashback of his life.
Yeah, there's actually one scene that I liked a lot that I thought was very beautiful. There's some really great shots. If I knew my Hindu religion better, maybe I could explain it. But it's like where they're on they're burning candles, they're at this pond. It doesn't seem like a real big body of water, but then you have all the lights at night. I don't know. It was a very well shot scene.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
It's in the beginning. It's when his dad is like, "Oh, don't believe any of this. Religion is a dark thing." You know, when his dad basically is whispering it to him in his ear.
Yeah, yeah. That, I mean, I thought that was pretty fun. He has two parents who are completely on opposite sides of the spectrum in terms of their attitude towards religion. Right, his mother's very religious. She's a devout Hindu, and his dad is like okay with religion like being generally in the space of his life, but he doesn't really have any real connection to it, and he's kind of like, don't rely on it, don't make it a central part of who you are. And so there's kind of a cool dynamic that you see going back and forth there. So there's even like, I mean, there's just there's these really nice scenes of kind of his mother doing the storytelling, kind of like these, these old stories from like the Hindu mythology, right? And you're getting to see kind of how that's influencing his character. And he's a very, I don't know, I guess you can call him agnostic, but agnostic is not the, agnostic is typically a person who doesn't know if they believe in God. This guy is sure he believes in God. He's just not sure how many religions he's going to pick.
Or like how to reach God, I guess. So he's picking them all.
Yeah, exactly. He's he figures if he tries them all, he's getting through somehow. And that's kind of a focus of the movie too, right? So we have some characters early in the movie who don't believe in God. We have some that do, and then we have some that are open to several different approaches. And that gets criticized very early on. That, like, that's not how religion works, right? You have to pick one because there is one true religion, and that is just not something that fits into Pai's character at all, right?
Honestly, I think it's a good depiction of really what like like South Asia, subcontinent, India, like that area was for so long, so many different religions living together, at least before British India did the whole divide and conquer strategy. But like, I don't know, it just gave a perspective into like what India is, which is a very multicultural, very diverse, multi-religious community.
Yeah, that's true. You have kind of the French culture, the Indian culture, then you have the Hindu culture, the Christian culture, the Muslim culture, all in the same space. So I mean, I thought that was kind of really, those were fun scenes. You get to kind of move through all these different cultural aspects, and they didn't like, waste a lot of time to do that. They were able to do that pretty succinctly, which I thought was I thought was pretty good. You want to talk about his name and the whole story about how he decided on the nickname Pi? I thought that was really fun. It was reminiscent of, I think, something we can all relate to, kind of being, a child, in school. These little things that you get picked on for, and like it kind of scars you. And he takes a very complex approach to get himself out of, like, getting made fun of for his name.
Yeah, so he's named after a swimming pool in France called a piscine molitor. I mean, I don't have my French at all, so I couldn't do it. Can you?
No, I thought it was pretty, the piscine molitor is how they were saying it, I think,
Yeah,
but
so
whatever.
piscine obviously to a non-French speaker can sound very similar to pissing. So all the kids in school make fun of him for his name and call him pissing. And he eventually decides, I'm gonna like stop this now. I'm gonna change my name or make a nickname and call myself Pi. Pi based off the Greek letter, the number, same thing, right? He goes, like you said, the great lengths to, in every class, whenever at the beginning of the school year, when the teacher calls him for attendance, he goes up and he tells everyone, my name is Pi. You can call me Pi. It's based off this, gives a whole history, and then apparently he actually memorized I don't know how many digits of pi, but he just did because
It looked like thousands the way they showed it on the chalkboard, so, I mean,
out on a yeah, on a chalkboard during his math class, and then like makes him like a legend at the school, and everyone starts calling him Pi, and that's what he goes by.
yeah, I love the scene where you can just see the hallways and kids are just running through, and the teachers are trying to get through. They're not even, they're not separate from this mania. They're trying to push through the kids so they can all get to the classroom to see, like, this kid is listing off all the digits of pi, and he's like, he's on his like third or fourth chalkboard at this point. He's still going, and they're like trying to check in like a some sort of textbook, like, is this accurate, or is he just making it up, and turns out he knows his stuff. So I thought that was great. Yeah, like, another thing to your point about the cultural elements that are playing together here. English is commonly taught in India. That's still true to this day, but they knew the word pissing, which, that's slang. I don't even know, is that British English slang, or is that only American English slang? I'm not sure, but they knew the word pissing, and they're just kids. In a country that, doesn't primarily speak English. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and it was pretty hilarious every time these kids come on the screen and they're just like, "Hey, Pissing Patel!" Like, it makes you laugh even if you don't want to. It's kind of an obvious joke, but I don't know. You see the, the kind of the joy it brings to the kids, and it makes you laugh, even though Pi is clearly, he's struggling to get away from that nickname. And then the first time he goes up to the chalkboard and he explains, "I'm now Pi Patel based on the Greek letter, blah blah blah," and then he sits back down. The kid behind him kind of nudges him, and he's like, "Hey, nice try pissing." I mean, there was really good comedy there for I mean, you could really I felt I don't know if you were ever made fun of for your name as a kid, but I mean, I heard my share and I could really it just resonated with me, you know what I mean? I mean, that was such a common occurrence. I think most kids can, if not your name, in some way, some little thing that you do or something that happens and you get made fun of it for like a year. I think everyone can relate to that. So, that was very easy to relate to
Yeah,
there.
it humanizes Pi right away.
Yeah.
This really gets us into who Pi is, a very curious young child who is very, very spiritual. And there's this one line when they get a tiger at the zoo that they live at. The tiger is called Richard Parker. Now, he wants to go and feed the tiger, and then his dad abruptly stops him because his dad's like, "You can't be doing this. It's too dangerous. The tiger might bite your hand off." And like Pai's like, "No, I saw like, like he was safe. Like I could tell." And then he said something about like I could see it in his eyes. And then his dad replies back saying, "When you look into his eyes, you're only seeing your own emotions reflected back at you."
I thought the zoo was actually a pretty important element here. Not only because it kind of sets up his relationship with animals, right? So they're growing. He's growing up. Him and his brother are growing up on a zoo that his father runs, and they all have kind of a relationship with these animals because the Hinduism that he grew up on is important here, right? Because in Hinduism, animals are held in a pretty high regard, more than other religions for sure, and so he has more than just kind of an ownership relationship with these animals. They're taking care of them, but it's also kind of a part of their life. These are real creatures, right? They are sentient creatures, and that's pretty evident. And that kind of is shown in the most acute manner when he has an encounter with Richard Parker as a child.
The dad also like shows him a brutal life lesson by bringing a goat and letting the tiger devour the goat in front of Pi so Pi can see how dangerous a tiger can be.
Yeah, that was really sad. I mean, his mom is like begging his dad, like, they don't need to see this. They're just kids. And he was like, no, they need to learn and they need to learn now. And he makes them watch as the tiger just, kills and devours this entire animal. And so, yeah, talk about a strange upbringing. I think one thing that is evident is that while him and again, this plays into the fact that they have different religious beliefs, but while him and his brother and his mother, they have a specific regard for these animals. Their dad does not. And so the next thing that happens, right? Things are not going well in India. There's some unrest, and they want to get out of there, right? But they don't really own the land that the zoo's on, so they can't sell the zoo. So what they decide to do is sell the animals instead. So their dad, he figures we're gonna move to French Canada. That's another place where there's French influence. We're a little bit familiar. I can sell some of the animals overseas. I have some buyers, so that's where we're going. So they get they get passage on like this Japanese freight ship, I suppose, right?
Yeah, it's just a freight ship that's going, I guess, to Canada, and they basically hop on because I assume the ship was willing to take his animals.
Yeah, and I mean, you can see that, like, yeah, there's all these animals on there. It's kind of wild, and their dad, again, he doesn't have the same regard for the animals. He's just feeding them tranquilizers, and he's like, you got it. No, he's not feeding them. What is he feeding? I think he's giving them like
No, it is. It's
tranquilizers.
he's basically drugging them by putting like pills into their food so they fall asleep because he's afraid that they're going to get seasick and they're going to cause a mess on the boat.
Yeah, and that's what it was. And so he's basically, I mean, again, he's just looking at them as property that he owns as part of a business, and how do I deal with them in the most efficient manner for this business. Pi, on the other hand, is worried about the individual animals and are they comfortable, do they need room to roam around, and their dad's like what are you even talking about, like just give them the tranquilizers and they'll shut up and they'll stay in one place.
Hey, we should also note that Pi did not want to leave India. Like right before like they leave, like he meets this girl Anandi, and he seems to have a liking for her, and she does for him. So they become friends very quickly, but at the same time, like it ends abruptly because his family is leaving India, and he's very much against that. So he's not really in a great mood when they leave India.
Yeah, that's true. Like he kind of had this big not a fight. I mean, they were willing to, him and his brother were willing to go with his dad's plan and head over to French Canada. But yeah, by no means were they happy about it. They were kind of disgruntled, and they're on this boat, and their dad's kind of telling them, "No, it's going to be okay. You're going to see when we get there. It's going to be fine. You're going to like it." The family never makes it there because something happens in the middle of the night. We don't exactly know what. All we know is that there is a storm going on. And Pi, being the excitable kid he is, he says, "I want to go watch the storm. I want to see the thunderstorm." And he tries to wake up his brother, and his brother's like, "You're an idiot. We're going to get struck by lightning." And so Pi's like, "All right, whatever, I'm going." And he runs out to the top of the ship. He goes out on the deck. He's sliding around in the storm. It looks like he's having a great time. I was
One note before, like when his brother, basically, his brother's like, "Hey, you're gonna get hit by lightning." Pi's like, "No, no, it'll hit the bridge first. It won't hit us." And then his brother's like, "Don't tempt the storm, Pi." And that was almost like an ominous feeling. Like, all right, something's gonna happen here. This is it.
Yeah, that's true. And it's like, I mean, I don't know. I thought again, the cinematography. This is where it really picks up in the movie. But I thought him out on the deck of the ship, kind of sliding around, like I was getting seasick just watching. I thought he was gonna fly off the deck of the ship because he was like sliding around so like violently, basically.
Yeah.
But he's having a great time. He's loving it until he sees some of the other sailors in a panic. And so
Well, like
he's wondering what's going
an
on.
alarm like goes off, so it's blaring, and he starts like seeing, like you said, the other sailors, the Japanese men who are on the deck, literally get swept away when a huge wave just comes crashing onto the boat or the ship, and that's when he decides he's gonna go back down to the bunkers and get his parents and brother out. But now this scene was like very hard to watch because it felt so claustrophobic. Like
Oh
it's
yeah.
so tight, so small. We should have. I don't think we've mentioned this, but Pi is an incredible swimmer because of his uncle.
He is a great swimmer because of Mama G.
Yeah,
Mama G is an important character. We don't see him on screen more than once or twice, but Mama G is the whole reason that Pi is able to handle himself to the degree that he can throughout this whole ordeal, right?
yeah, and Mama G is the reason he's named Pi because Mama G is the one who swam at that pool in France and told his dad about it.
So it's not his real uncle, right? It's just like a friend of his dad. He's like that kind of uncle, like the
Yeah,
Indian type of uncle.
exactly.
Yeah.
Just like a very close family friend, and you call him an uncle.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, Pi's dad is a little bit eccentric since he decided to open a zoo in French India, which is cool. But he has, this close friend who Pi refers to as Mamaji, and Mama G was like a swimming enthusiast. And there's even a line where he says something about, other people, they collect things, when they go visiting places. Mama G collects swimming pools. He swims in every swimming pool he comes across. And so this guy is just, I mean, there's even some story about how he was born with like large lungs and skinny legs because the surgeon, was trying to get the water out of his lungs when he was born. So he swung him by the legs around in a circle. So this guy is basically, he's just built for swimming. He's obsessed with swimming, and this rubs off on Pi's dad, right? He's always telling him, you gotta teach him to swim. And so the whole time that Pi is a child, he's getting lessons from Mamaji on swimming. And to your point, not only that, but at birth, Pi's dad is apparently told by Mamaji, look, you should name him after the Piscine Molitor because that was the best pool that I've ever swam in. And so that's how Pi ends up with his name.
Yeah, so back to the scene on the boat, he is very capable of swimming back down in the water and in the bunker, but he's not able to get to his family. And then he comes back out and he sees everyone on the boat is in a panic and they're telling him, get on the lifeboat now. And he's just saying, no, no, I can't. I need to go get my family. Where's my family at? Are you going to make sure that they're okay? Obviously, they're not. So like he just gets like into the lifeboat goes down, and as the waves are crashing like crazy, he's just being thrown around like that violent like nature that you're talking about when he's on the deck and he's sliding around. Now he has like no control, but he's just like being flung in and out of the boat. He's just trying to make sure he doesn't die. you can't see anything. This is one of those scenes where you can't appreciate as well on any home like theater setup. It has to be like seen on the big screen because there's just so much going on and it's so intense that it really sucks you in at this moment. And then there's this one incredible shot and very sad shot where he is underwater because he's been thrown off the lifeboat and he's swimming and he's just looking out and he can see the entire ship that he was on with all of his lights all like sinking underwater. It's like, pretty much all underwater and he's just like floating in the water staring out into it, and it's just like a surreal moment where it's like a time for you to catch your breath but then at the same time like digest what just happened, which is he just lost his entire family and he's just left out here.
Yeah, that shot, I love that shot. I think I also wanted to say even earlier than that, when he's below deck trying to get back to his parents, that was a really cool scene to me because there's floating animals kind of trying to swim past him as he's maneuvering through these tight hallways, and that was really well done. But you're in a whole panic for that whole sequence, and this is the first moment where you get kind of a little bit of silence, right? He's under the water. He's kind of he dove in, he's under the boat somewhere, there's sharks circling beneath him, and he just kind of turns back to look at the ship, and yeah, the lights of the ship are kind of like just blaring in his eyes, but you can't hear any of the chaos anymore. So it's kind of this singular moment of peace suddenly, but nothing's better, right? I mean, all the chaos that just happened, it's not undone. But he just gets kind of this moment to look back, and I mean, he can see kind of his life floating away from him in that moment. So yeah, that was pretty surreal. It was like, one of those terrifying but beautiful moments, right? And he makes the decision then, not to swim back that way. He swims back to the boat and he stays there. And that's what kicks off the rest of the movie and the whole journey he's about to go on. And this is also the moment in the movie where the timeline kind of splits. There's two possible interpretations that you can have of the movie from this point forward, right? So I mean, let's talk about it. After watching the movie, you come to understand that everything you're watching, it may be more of kind of a convenient, more pleasant explanation for all the stuff that Pi went through.
Fabrication.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember when I watched this movie the first time, I was thinking through, like, it's almost kind of like it's kind of like a PTSD issue that he's having. Like some people, you end up with kind of like a split understanding of events, or you come up with a completely different, a completely different interpretation of how something happened. But internally, psychologically, you believe that's what actually happened, right? He's kind of having this experience where he's going through some horrific things, and to justify it in his brain and to let himself be able to cope with what's going on, he kind of comes up with this still weird and terrifying but somewhat more pleasant story for how he gets through this whole shipwreck, right? We didn't really talk about the one, the meal on the ship that we see him and his family with the sailors. They have this in, whatever, in the kitchen that the ship has, just kind of putting together whatever slop they have. And the cook is not a very nice man. He kind of he just throws some food in front of them, and the mom's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, we're vegetarian." And he was like, okay, I mean, there's some he says something stupid, like, essentially, yeah, there's some vegetables in there, and she's like, no, I'm sorry, we can't eat the meat. And he was like, all right, make your own meal then. So he's kind of this very rude, I don't know, was he a French ship captain? I don't know, but he,
I'm
he,
not
he
sure
has
what
some
he was,
accent,
but
but
he was able to speak French because that's what they decided to talk to him in.
yeah, and so they kind of have this very rude back and forth, and he basically tells him to get out of his kitchen, and they end up kind of sitting somewhere eating plain rice, and then there's this Buddhist sailor who comes up to them, and he was like, "Hey, I only eat the rice too, but I eat the gravy too because it's just to add taste. Don't think of it as meat." Even though there's meat in there, he's like, just we're on a ship, like you have to bend the rules a little bit. So he's kind of the kindred spirit for them on this ship, and basically after watching the movie, you see that these two characters kind of come back into play, right? When I'm sorry, not when the ship, when the lifeboat goes into the water, the ship captain, I mean the not the ship captain, I keep calling him that, the cook is on that lifeboat. And he is kind of urging everyone, hey, let's go, let's go. And he's only concerned about himself. He's not even concerned about the other sailors, and he makes that clear. But he ends up, because of all the chaos of the storm, he flies off the ship, or at least that's what we see in this moment.
Yeah, so we see the cook, the rude man, fly off, and then it's basically, and then we see a zebra come like crashing down onto the boat, and then clearly the zebra breaks its leg when it gets on the boat, so it's more or less just in one position, just in the corner of the boat. And then you have Pi, of course, and then Pi helps, like he sees out in the distance in the water someone coming towards, or someone or something in the water, so he throws a life jacket, or what are they called, a
The
lifesaver
little
thing?
donut, right?
Yeah, the donut. And he realizes that's Richard Parker, and then Richard Parker gets on the boat. Now what you're saying is that we could have two different narratives here. Is Pi initially tells us the story that there was a tiger, there was the zebra that came crashing down. Later on came an orangutan that was floating on bananas, and then there was a hyena, and then him. That they were all on the boat.
It's not until the end of the movie, right, that we find out that maybe those are actually people, and he couldn't deal with kind of the horrors of being lost at sea, and what people did to each other. And so instead, he just tells himself this nice story that it was a bunch of the zoo animals. And so, we get that out of him kind of at the end of the movie, which I do want to talk about a little bit more in depth, but let's come back to it. But yeah, like we basically get told that actually the zebra was the Buddhist sailor, and the hyena was the rude cook, and the orangutan was Pai's mom, and the tiger wasn't there at all. That's actually just a manifestation of Pai himself. So
Yeah.
really, it was just the four people on this boat, and they were the only ones that were able to get away from the wreck.
Obviously, the way we're watching the movie and the way they present it at the end, it really sets it up very well, right? Because we all want to remember the story as if they were the actual animals and not actual people.
Yeah, you don't want to.
Not just that it's more pleasant. It's more. I guess what you said is true. Like the horrors that people might commit with each other in a desperate time, such as being on a lifeboat and scarcity of food and water. But like it's easier to digest it when you have a hyena killing the zebra and eating it, right? Or the orangutan. Like it's easier to digest it when you see animals doing that, because like we saw earlier in the movie from Pai's dad, animals aren't like us in that sense, and they have different behaviors. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I knew this from the book because this part's obviously in the book as well. But like it's one of those things I feel like I wish you could just leave it up to the audience without mentioning it, whether they wanted to believe it or not, especially in a movie that's an adaptation.
Well, actually, so this is one of the gripes that I had with how they set up the ending. And again, maybe this has more to do with the fact that they have this, like, I don't know, whatever. They've put this construct in there where they have this writer who's listening to Pai's story, and he's recounting now at the end of the movie, he's recounting him telling the same story to these insurance agents that are coming to try and figure out what the hell happened to this Japanese ship, right? And they want to know, they're more interested, frankly, in what the cause of the sinking of the ship was, and he has no idea about that. Even as the audience, we really haven't seen what caused it. All we know is there was a storm. But he tells them his whole story from start to finish of trying to survive out there, and they're just like, this is all we have to go back and report. So this is a part of the movie where I thought they very slightly in tone, they diverged from what happens in the book. So Pi tells this very sad story of how actually the orangutan was his mother, and the zebra was a Buddhist, etc., etc. And he's got tears coming down his face throughout this, and he's very slowly recounting all of the emotions that he felt as the ship as the ship cook uh kills the Buddhist sailor whose leg is broken and uses him for bait, and then just starts eating him instead. And then when I think basically at one point Pi makes a mistake, and so he loses a fish or something, or a turtle, I think it was, right? And so the cook hits Pi really hard, and then Pi's mom gets into an argument with him. Long story short, we don't know exactly what happened, but Pi's mom is killed by the cook in that moment, and the next day Pi kills the cook in return of that, right? So that's the story we get at the end in the movie, which is the same as the story we get in the book. However, it's a very slowly told, sad tale of, him kind of coming to terms with the reality of what happened in the movie. In the book, however, he's almost annoyed at the insurance agents, and he kind of says, okay, you know what? You want a story you can believe? The orangutan was my mother. The hyena was the cook, and I'm the tiger. And like he kind of gives them the details of this person killed this person and this person killed this person. He does, but it's much less believable in the book. I don't know how to say that exactly, but basically, because I was reading it in words, but rather than seeing it on screen, but it's it's told in a way where he's just kind of trying to shrug off these insurance agents. So you're much more open-ended in that situation, right? Like you're free to believe whichever version you want. In the movie, however, because of the way it's told and the sadness that is portrayed while he's telling it, it's almost just like a fact that we're being presented now, right? I don't know how you felt about that, but I definitely think that's a difference between the book and the movie.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. It could have been a little more open-ended in the movie, but there was one thing that confused me at the end. So when the Canadian writer is reading the insurance report from the Japanese freight company,
Yeah.
like at the end it says it like, oh, in the accompaniment of a adult Bengal tiger. So I was like, wait, what? So is he seeing that now? Because I guess this gets to one of my questions. What did Pi mean when he said, and so it goes with God? Like he tells the Canadian writer the story, the one with the animals, the one that we see in the movie, and then he mentions the one that he told the insurance agents where the animals are replaced with actual people. And then he says, which one do you prefer? And obviously the writer says the one with the animals, with the tiger. And he replies saying, and so it goes with God. And then we see the writer read the insurance report, and on the report it says, oh, accompanied with an adult Bengal tiger. So was he like reading that himself because he now prefers that story and that's what he sees? I don't know, like how I didn't know how to take that ending, and I'm not sure what he really meant when he said, "And so it goes with God."
So I thought, to me, this is the strong point in terms of the theme of the movie, because this brings everything kind of full circle, right? We've been watching this whole ordeal, but it started out with the journey of a kid kind of navigating his way through different religions, right? And this kind of brings it full circle. It's funny. I mean, you can basically say that regardless of which story you believe, there's a few things that are constant. His whole childhood leading up to boarding the ship, and even the first few days on the ship, that is constant in both stories. And also constant in both stories is the fact that he gets off the lifeboat. He makes it back to land, and I think he lands he lands on shore somewhere in Mexico, if I'm not mistaken. But we know those facts for sure in either story. What is not clear is what happens in between, right? And it's we've actually discussed pretty much the entire movie except for what happens in between. So we're pretty much taking the same route with this podcast, I guess. But you know, basically, it's a black box. Certain things go in and certain things come out, and we don't know exactly what happened in between. So, I mean, the question we're being asked at the end is more of like, well, there's a few different options, and one of them is more pleasant, and one of them is way less pleasant. Which one do you feel like believing? Because it really doesn't matter, because the result, the product of that whole situation is the same in either story. So which one do you prefer? Clearly, the writer says, I prefer the one with the animals. And he says, and so it goes with God. I took that to mean, maybe God is real and maybe God is not real, but believing in God actually makes you a better person. And it doesn't really matter whether God ends up being real, because the net result is the same. So if you believe in God and you're right, you are a good person because of it. And if you believe in God and you're wrong, you were a good person because of it, right? So I think that was more of kind of a testament to the fact that, Pi still as an adult feels that religions have a positive impact on humans, on their lives, and how they treat people, and how they treat the world, right? And you can see that most particularly with the treatment of animals that we see from the different characters. So that's almost like yeah, and so it goes with God. It doesn't matter what actually happened. What matters is the result that you get out of it, which, in the case of the movie is, or sorry, in the case of the ordeal is, he makes it back to shore, and he's the only one that survives, and his whole family's gone, and there's nothing he can do about it in either scenario. And in the case of religion and case of God, it's that, you make a positive impact, you are a more compassionate person because of religion, and it doesn't really matter whether that ends up being a justified belief or not.
Yeah, I saw it similar to that. I guess it was more, for me, I thought more, okay, there's a lot of stuff that happens in life, including what happens to Pi. There's a lot of suffering, obviously loss, particular his family, and these things are out of our control. And a lot of what happens to Pi is out of his control. Like the ship sinks, his parents pass away, his family, his brother, um, he gets lost out at sea. All this stuff happens outside of his control. And believing in God for him was like his way of like not losing hope, because he repeats that line a few times, because that's like in the survival kit book that he has on the boat. And like the last line in it is something like, oh, and never, or do not lose hope, or never lose hope, or something. And it's his way of, like, that's how it is with God. It's, if the suffering and the loss and all that stuff will be there regardless, then for him, like his perception of it, I guess it's just easier to deal with or digest if he believes in God.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it helps you through your journey, and the net result may be the same, but it'll make the journey more enjoyable, right? We're all on Earth. We're going to live and we're going to die. But what happens in between, and what kind of person comes out of that? I guess that's kind of what he's trying to get at, right? I thought that was kind of very succinctly stated in that statement, and so it goes with God. But it takes some unpacking after the movie, I think, to kind of figure out exactly what he was getting at. So I was thinking about this movie for quite a bit after I watched it, and particularly same situation after reading the book. You kind of have to work through that whole thought process on your own. And I like that about a movie, that it makes you think that hard even after you finish watching it. I'm not sure, now that you mention it, the report that he's reading back, is that really in text there? My interpretation kind of was, yeah, it's written there, and that's kind of, the insurance agents did not buy his story at all, and they were annoyed by this like fantastical story he was telling. But then he tells them what really happened, and then he's kind of like, which story do you want to believe? I felt like that was maybe just an indication they didn't buy the whole story, and they didn't want to tell that whole story, but just mentioning the Bengal tiger in isolation, right? Not even mentioning all the other elements of that version of the story, but just mentioning, yeah, the Bengal tiger was there with him. It's kind of an indication from the insurance agents that they agree with him, that he's right. Maybe that is the story that we should believe. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe that was just the writer kind of making his own interpretation too. Again, I just didn't love the scenes from the writer being there, but those are kind of the more explicit moments where they were trying to convey something, I think, right?
Yeah, they're trying to get the point across. So, I mean, I
Yeah.
get why they did it. That is one part where it could have been done better.
I think it would be interesting to rewatch the movie and just look for signs as to whether Richard Parker is real or whether he is just, an embodiment of Pi. And I think you can make the same case for the rest of the animals. I think there are indications that they are actually people. Particularly kind of in the way that he speaks to some of the animals early on. Like, I mean, you can take it two ways. It's him shouting in distress and knowing the animals won't understand him, but like there's also like some reactions that come from those animals in when he says particular things. So you can kind of play with all those elements and see which version you think is real. I mean, I think the movie does tend towards the version that this whole story was kind of just a cover for Pi for what actually happened. But I think there's kind of some interpretation you can do there.
That leaves a lot to interpret, because there's a one of the longer scenes of the movie is when he's trying to get the tiger off the boat, and this is like where he has like a moment of clarity where the tiger eventually does jump off. Richard Parker jumps off the boat to catch some fish because he's hungry, but he's unable to get back onto the boat. And Pi is like almost ready to like kill him, or like, make sure he gets away from the boat. But like he stops, looks into his eyes, and he's like, "What am I doing? I shouldn't be doing this." And then he sets up a whole like his separate little, I guess, boat off to the side of the boat, or this floating island off to the side of the boat with all of his supplies. And then he, like, drops down like a crate where the tiger can grab onto something and get back into the boat. I mean, like, there's a lot there. Like, okay, was he, if there's no tiger there and he's by himself, like, is he just like fighting with himself here? What's happening here? And then there's also the whole story of the island that he does come across, which is like a stopover where he resupplies in terms of food, because he's out here for 227 days
Yeah.
before he gets to Mexico. I mean, I don't know. It can go both ways. Again, it's up to us, right, as a viewer, to choose which way it goes.
Okay, let's take it the other way then, and let's say that Richard Parker is just actually Pi. So what does that whole scene actually? What's going on in that scene where you know, he jumps off the boat and he doesn't let the tiger back on the boat. What's actually going on there? It's got to be metaphorical in some sense, right? If we're just talking about Pi by himself. But what do you think is actually happening there then?
I'm not sure, man.
I mean,
I like to believe.
is it like a suicide attempt? Like, because at this point we have to consider the fact that Pi's mother has been killed in front of him, and in retaliation, he killed the cook the next day. He says that very explicitly at the end that it was only a day before I decided to kill him, and the cook knew it was coming too, and he knew he had gone too far. Like the cook
Yeah.
knew what was coming for him. So like that was a very kind of like dark scene, and so you have to imagine that like Pi, after having done that, if he did indeed do that, he's not very comfortable with himself anymore. And he may decide to take his life, right? What if that was a suicide attempt?
I don't know. I don't know if I buy that. It's hard to like see Pi doing that.
Well, he doesn't do it in the end, right? At some point, he decides, look, I did these things, and I'm gonna have to learn to live with it. And a lot of the movie is him saying, "I'm gonna have to learn to live with this tiger." So it's kind of, I mean, it is an interesting point to kind of think about. I mean, you'd have to do this for pretty much every scene in the movie and see how it plays out. But I'm sure there's a lot of interesting comparisons to be made there.
Does the tiger kills the hyena, right?
Yeah, the tiger kills the hyena, so that would have
The
been
hyena kills the orangutan and the zebra.
Yep, and so that is
Yeah, so it does
it's consistent.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I
Yeah,
don't
I'm
know.
not sure, man. There's a lot of like scenes where now you have the tiger just staring out. I mean, one of my favorite scenes was when the tiger is just staring out into the open sea, and Pi is asking him like, "What are you looking at? What are you staring at?" And then the tiger looks down into the water, and then Pi looks down into the water, and then you have like this sequence of like all these animals and the sea creatures, and he's basically hallucinating or something. I mean, it was almost like it like took me back to towards the beginning of the movie when his mom is telling Pi the story of Vishnu, or I think it was Vishnu, where like they think that she has eaten some dirt, and they ask her to open her mouth, and in it you could see like the universe.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I don't know. It's like that's what it took me back to, and it was one of the better moments on the boat. Now I'm thinking like, why would like what's the I don't know. I like the animal story, and
Yeah,
that's what I
yeah,
go with.
the whole idea ruins the movie for you, doesn't it? Uh,
Exactly, yeah.
just I mean,
Not just not the movie, but like the story. Like
just like
I wouldn't be interested in the
yeah,
story otherwise,
and I
right?
mean, I think that's kind of Pi's point at the end of the movie, right? Like, why do you want to believe the horrible version of the events? Like, why when you don't have to believe that version of it? I mean, that's the whole point of this, right? It really does ruin the movie. Which I mean, I guess that's a credit to the director himself, right? That like he was able to make you feel the same way about the movie that Pi is trying to make you feel about life, essentially, right? So there's some good parallelism there. I wanted to ask also, since you brought up that scene, what were like your favorite shots in the movie? And I think there were a lot. It's almost hard to narrow down.
There's a lot, but they're all like very much like similar in how they look. Like there's one like the first like sunrise, I guess they show. I think it's a sunrise, and the water is super still, and you got the clouds in the sky, and it's very golden, and you got the shot from up above with the boat, and then like his little raft off to the side.
I remember that one particularly. Like it's probably the brightest scene of like the movie because you see a lot of like dark shots and it's kind of him by himself on the boat, but that one like the whole screen is lit up and like pretty much the entire sky is reflected in the water, right?
Yeah, and we have that another time when it's nighttime and it's just this bunch of stars. Same thing, the stars are reflected into the water. And then you have that scene that we mentioned earlier with the ship sinking and he's just staring out into it while he's floating under the water.
Yeah.
And then there's another one. Oh, this is when the you got like the glowing plankton or whatever and the
Yeah,
jellyfish in
yeah,
the
they were
water.
jellyfish, right? That's what I thought. I didn't really know what they were, but the
And then a whale comes out. I think the whale just jumps over and
yeah.
then destroys his boat. I don't know, man, there's some great, great shots. This movie is a perfect score for me for cinematography for a very good reason. Like, it's such a great watch. It's so good to watch.
It's hard to argue with it. The one thing I was wondering is like I don't think the ocean ever gets that still. Like it was like literally dead
Yeah,
still
I'm pretty
water.
sure it never
I
does.
think that was just for the sake of the cinematography, which frankly I'm okay with, because those shots were like really that beautiful. And there's one other one where I think there's two. There's like the lightning storm that happens while he's on the lifeboat. So not the one with the ship, but there's one in the lightning storm, and like first of all that scene was pretty beautiful, but also like that was a point in the movie where Pi has like clearly lost it. Like he's lost his mind essentially, and he's ready to die. So he's like offering himself up to the gods essentially, in the middle of
Well,
that
did you
lightning storm.
notice actually, did you notice that I know what scene you're talking about, it's like when the storm is coming and he, wants, like, Richard Parker to see the storm, and
Yeah,
Richard Parker is just, like, scared as hell of what's going on because it's so
yeah.
loud and it's a big storm. But you notice that he started, well, not reciting, but translating, Sut al-Fatiha.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So he's reciting from the Quran. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it was odd to see like when he chose to bring up which religion, because he brings up Hindu gods at some point, he brings up Islam at other points, and then like he's also like, I mean. I think yeah, there's actually multiple points where he brings up like he brings up Jesus and like he even does grace at the table.
Yeah, my favorite is when he's like before he goes to bed, this is when he's a kid, he's like, "Thank you, Vishnu, for introducing me to Christ."
Yeah, so he thinks like they have an interworking relationship as well. Uh, and that, but I think so. The last scene that I thought was really cool was it's when he gets to like this very mysterious island, and it's in the middle of the night, and for some reason Richard Parker knows that there's something up here, so he never stays on land for the middle of the night. He runs back to the boat, and the entire night Richard Parker is just sitting up in the boat, staring at the island, not sleeping, just looking at the island like in like an uninterrupted gaze. So like I thought that was like weird. It was very beautiful. First off, like the shot, you can just see his silhouette and you can just see the glowing of the island and all of the different trees. And actually they pull that shot back even further, maybe in that moment or maybe a separate moment, but you can see the entire island. And I don't know if you noticed this, but like the outline of all of the trees and their branches and everything, the whole island taken as a whole from far away, the entire thing is shaped like a man laying on his back. Like very clearly, it's just like the shape of a person that's like lying dead or
Oh,
lying
wow.
asleep. Yeah.
I did not notice that. Actually, there's a lot of shots on the island that I thought were also great, like that lagoon, like in the middle of the island where he drinks water from
Oh yeah,
during
like
the
there's
day.
all the meerkats around the lagoon, but then
Yeah.
like then you have this like perfectly still clear water in the middle, right? I don't know how much of this was like CGI. I can imagine a lot of it is, but like all those meerkats, that was like really well done too. I mean, it just
Yeah,
like
that's actually another point. This movie holds up pretty well. I mean, it's not that old. It's only 7 years old right now, but like we've come a long way with like CGI and like After Effects and special effects right now, but this movie holds up pretty well still.
yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone can say that like the CGI took away from the movie for them. Like there's so much of it, but I don't think at any point like even the Richard Parker is on screen for pretty much the entire movie, and I don't think I ever got the sense that like oh that looks unrealistic or oh like that's distracting because it feels
Yeah.
fake. I don't think I ever got that. So I mean yeah, I mean we've come a long way, and I still can't tell. But yeah, I don't think there's anything here where it was detracting at all. And despite how prevalent the CGI must have had to be to pull off a movie like this.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty impressive.
On the island itself, like, what did you think of that whole like storyline? It was very odd. It was kind of like a break from the, I don't know, yeah, it was a break from like all the struggles that he's going through throughout the journey. I remember I was getting really bored with the book actually, and then when he got to the island, I got like so into it again, and that enthusiasm pretty much carried me through the rest of the book. And it kind of has a similar effect in the movie, but
Yeah, like you said, because it was getting like repetitive on the sea.
yeah.
Like the same thing was happening over and over again, going through like a cycle, and then it was a nice break to be on an island. Now, again, this whole island business is like, all right, what do we believe here? What actually happened? What was real? What wasn't? I mean, he must have like found something and gotten like food and supplies somehow, right? Because he's out there for so long. There's no way the lifeboat had so much for him.
Yeah, I mean, one way to interpret it is like he comes across some island. It's probably just a normal, crappy island. It has, scarce food, but it has something for him. It has some plants. It's not like this like lush green, wonderland with all these like happy animals. And then, so Richard Parker gets his fill and he gets his fill of vegetables. He's just eating the roots of the trees. Like maybe it's not that. Maybe he just gets a little something, but in his mind, it's like so amplified because he was, about to die basically. And like that lightning storm was right before then. So like he's pretty much offering himself up for death in that scene, and then this is what kind of rejuvenates him and says, "Okay, I can do this. I can make it." So whatever was on that island, it was just enough to bring him back. So maybe this is kind of an interpretation of what he's actually, what it feels like to him internally versus what actually happened. On the other hand, if you want to believe his version of it, and so it goes with God, I guess. So like it, right? Like I mean, this is probably the most unrealistic thing, right? Of everything we've seen and heard to this point, this is the most unrealistic thing, and this is the part where you can't really reconcile it because you have to believe that there's like a carnivorous island out there that nobody has ever found since or before then. So that's like the hardest part to swallow if you want to believe his story.
Yeah, no, you're right for sure. It's like you said, it's easy to believe that he just came across something and found some food and water, decided to stack up and realize I can make it if I just. I mean, maybe he tells himself the island is carnivorous because if he didn't tell himself that, he would end up staying there and not continue to find people or civilization.
Yeah, exactly. I think that makes sense, right? And then shortly after that scene, he finds his way back to land. He lands on the shore of Mexico, and Richard Parker gets off the boat, takes one look around, and just runs straight into the forest, and he never sees him again, right? So that was kind of a sticking point for him.
Yeah, it was, and I mean, it came up to like a particular point he was trying to make, which is like we don't get to say goodbye, or like he doesn't like it how you don't have like life is about letting go, like things are going to happen, right? Like the suffering and the loss and all that, but what's worse is not having that moment to say goodbye. And he was like, I mean, he's saying he's totally like devastated that Richard Parker didn't even take a moment to like turn around or acknowledge him before disappearing into the forest. And I mean, it's a sad moment because he mentions how he never had that chance to say goodbye to his dad.
Yeah, his whole
And
family,
I did
right?
notice that, yeah, well, he specifically mentions his dad, so it only like gives more credence to like the fact that maybe his mom was with him on the boat.
Yeah, that's
And like,
true.
whereas with his dad, it was more abrupt because of the sinking of the ship. I don't know, but I'm just saying, like, that was a good moment and had a good point to it. And I don't know, it made me sad too. I mean, I have a cat, and I can totally tell my cat would not give a shit if I, if like, it just found something and it was just like, all right, leave me alone with no attention, despite all the affection and care we have given it.
Yeah, and it proves his father right in a way, right? Because like his father was always trying to stress to him with animals generally, but particularly with Richard Parker, that he's not your friend and he's never going to be your friend. And so throughout this whole thing, throughout this whole ordeal, we're kind of seeing some emotions in Richard Parker. We're seeing a relationship build there, but if you look at the way that his dad would have viewed this, he was just basically, you were a tool that was allowing him to survive. And so after that's over, I mean, there's nothing there. So yeah, he didn't even turn around because he doesn't have a relationship with you. You have a relationship with him, but he doesn't have one back with you. So I mean, it's almost like he's sad because he didn't get to say goodbye to Richard Parker. He specifically stresses, I just wanted him to acknowledge an end to our relationship, that that we made it through our journey, and he just doesn't get that, right? So I mean, it's almost like he's sad about that, but he's also sad that, like, these creatures are as heartless as my dad said they were. So how is it any different that Richard Parker survived and his family didn't? Not really any, because they all left him the same way, right? He didn't get to say goodbye to any of them. He didn't really have that moment with any of them. So yeah, that was, I mean, it's kind of emblematic of, like, life, I guess, right? It's always, and it's always harder to absorb something, especially bad news, when you don't have the time to see it coming, and you don't have some time to deal with it as it's happening, right?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because I was reading Roger Ebert's review of the movie, and he like ends it by saying that this movie could just be called Life, because it really is a lot about just life.
Yeah, it's about how you deal with I mean, with things that go wrong. It's also about how you deal with, I don't know, your existence in general, and like how you view how you view whether there is a God and all of that, and how you act in response to that. So I guess that's true. I mean, it is generally, we're seeing a very extreme version of life. We're seeing something that pretty much nobody goes through, but you can apply it to everyone's boring old normal lives, I guess.
All right, so Yusuf, I think we're done.
I think we're there.
All right, cool. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back next week.
And so it goes with God.
I guess so, yeah.
Thanks for listening to this production of The Twice Over. If you haven't already, subscribe and follow wherever you get your podcast, and remember to support us on Patreon or by sharing the podcast with a friend. Feel free to contact us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at The Twice Over, or email us at comments@thetwiceover.com. All of the music you heard is from Amerigo Gazaway. Check him out on Bandcamp and Spotify.